The sky over Blackwood Command Staff College had been a bruised purple for hours, and now it had broken open. Rain didn't just fall. It was a physical assault, a relentless barrage of cold, heavy drops that hammered the earth with the sound of 1,000 drums. It was a biblical flood, turning the manicured lawns and hardened training grounds into a churning sea of mud and misery. For the first-year cadets, this was the Crucible Run, a night drill designed less to test their physical limits and more to sandblast away any lingering notion that a soldier-ass life was one of glory and parades. It was designed to find the breaking point. Among the shivering, mud-caked figures struggling through the obstacle course, one stood out, not for her size or speed, but for the sheer, stubborn set of her jaw. Cadet Maya Castillo was a ghost in the ranks, a recruit whose file was thin on accolades, and barren of the prestigious family names that followed so many of her peers. She was the daughter of a mechanic from a forgotten town in the Midwest, a place where the highest ambition was a steady job, not a commission in the nation's most elite officer corps. What Maya lacked in pedigree, she made up for with a fire that burned just behind her eyes, a quiet, unyielding defiance that refused to be extinguished by the mud, the cold, or the incessant barking of the instructors. Each time she slipped and fell, she rose without a sound, her movements economical and fueled by a purpose that seemed to run deeper than the simple desire to pass a test. Others, in her platoon, those who could trace their lineage back through generations of decorated officers, saw this determination. Some, in quiet moments, admired it, but most, led by the platoon's golden boy, Cadet Sergeant Kellen Bunsey, saw it as an affront. Vance, whose father was a celebrated general with a portrait already hanging in the academy's hallowed halls, moved with an unearned confidence. He saw Maya's grit not as a virtue, but as a silent challenge to the natural order he believed in. To him, she was an anomaly, a weed in a carefully cultivated garden, and her resilience was an unspoken accusation against those who had been given everything. He and his clique made their displeasure known in small ways. A misplaced piece of gear before inspection, a whispered joke just loud enough for her to hear, an extra lap assigned for a fabricated infraction. Tonight, under the cover of the roaring storm, their resentment was beginning to curdle into something far more dangerous. As Maya hauled herself over a slick 10-foot wall, her muscles screaming in protest she could feel. Vance's eyes on her cold and calculating a silent promise that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one he intended to unleash. The heart of Blackwood Academy wasn't its state-of-the-art training facilities or its sprawling campus. It was Memorial Hall. It was a long, cavernous space paneled in dark, polished wood, where the air was thick with the scent of old books and floor wax, but no one noticed the architecture. All eyes were drawn to the walls, which were covered in the stern, painted faces of the Academy's legends. These were the Titans, the men and women who had become almost mythological figures in the stories told to new cadets. There was General Ironhand Madsen, who held a pass against impossible odds with only a sidearm and a handful of men. There was Admiral Serafina Rostova, the master strategist who outmaneuvered an enemy fleet twice the size of her own in the Azure Straits. And next to her, her daughter, Captain Eva Rostova, a pilot whose portrait was painted posthumously after she drew enemy fire to allow her squadron to escape. Their names were etched onto plaques, spoken with reverence in lectures, and held up as the gold standard of valor. The message was clear and suffocating. This is the legacy you must uphold. Greatness is the price of admission. For many cadets, like Vance, this hall was a family album. They walked its length with a sense of inherited pride, pointing out grandfathers and great. For them, the path to greatness was a well-trodden road, paved by the generations before them. For Maya Castillo, Memorial Hall felt like a foreign country. She would often stand in the shadows of the great archways after evening mess, staring up at the portraits. She saw the iron in their gazes, the unshakable confidence etched into their features. She didn't see family. She saw a standard she had to meet on her own terms. Her bloodline was filled with welders, farmers, and teachers good. Honest people who had never known the weight of a nation's security on their shoulders. Her father had taught her how to rebuild an engine, how to work until her hands were raw and her back ached, how to face a problem not with clever words but with stubborn, relentless effort. Those were the lessons she brought to Blackwood, and they felt laughably inadequate in the face of these painted demigods. She wasn't driven by a desire for fame or a longing to see her own portrait on the wall. Her ambition was simpler, more primal. She just wanted to prove that she deserved to be there, that a person's worth wasn't dictated by their last name. Every grueling march, every sleepless night spent studying tactics, every ounce of pain she pushed through was a silent argument against the unspoken belief that she was an imposter. She stood in the hall not to worship the heroes of the past, but to draw strength from them, to borrow a piece of their fire as she prepared for the battles she knew were coming. The Crucible Run ended just after midnight. Cadets, coated in a thick layer of cooling mud and shivering uncontrollably, stumbled back toward the warmth and light of the barracks. They were exhausted to the bone, their spirits worn down to a raw nub. It was a time for camaraderie, for shared misery that was supposed to forge bonds. But for some, it was an opportunity. As Maya peeled off her drenched fatigues, her movements stiff and slow, she noticed Vance and his two closest cronies, Cadets Miller and Thorne, watching her from across the room. Their laughter was low and conspiratorial. She ignored it, focusing on the simple, immediate need for a hot shower and a few hours of dreamless sleep. She grabbed her towel and headed for the communal showers, the last one to do so. When she returned, wrapped in a towel and dripping onto the cold concrete floor, she found the main door to the barracks locked. At first, she thought it was a mistake, a jammed lock. She jiggled the handle, then knocked. "Hey, open up!" A muffled snicker came from the other side. It was Vance's voice, laced with contempt. "Sorry, Castillo." Captain's orders. A little extra discipline drill for those who need to learn their place. The lie was so blatant, it was insulting. Through the thick wooden door, she could hear the laughter of the others, a cruel, sharp sound that cut through the drumming of the rain, the laughter of the pack, safe and warm inside, mocking the lone wolf left out in the cold. They hadn't just locked a door, they had drawn a line, declaring her an outsider, someone who didn't belong to their tribe. A wave of cold far deeper than the rain washed over her. It was a bitter, isolating humiliation. She was alone, standing in nothing but a towel in the middle of a torrential downpour, while the very people who were supposed to be her brothers in arms laughed at her expense. She could bang on the door, scream, and demand to be let in. She could report them in the morning, but she knew that would only brand her as a victim, a whiner, someone who couldn't handle the academy's harsh culture. It would be a victory for them. So, she did nothing. She stood there as the rain plastered her hair to her scalp and streamed down her face, washing away the mud and grime. And as the cold seeped into her bones, something else began to happen. The humiliation began to burn away, replaced by a clarity so sharp it was almost painful. The laughter from inside the barracks faded into the background, becoming just another part of the storm's roar. She remembered the portraits in Memorial Hall. She thought of General Madsen, holding a pass against an entire battalion. Had he felt comfortable? Had Captain Rostova felt safe as she flew into enemy fire? They hadn't broken her. They had given her a gift. They had stripped away the illusion of camaraderie and shown her the cold, hard truth. The only person she could truly rely on was herself. A vow, silent and absolute, formed in her mind. It wasn't a promise of revenge. It was simpler. You will not break me. You will watch me succeed. In that moment, the storm wasn't her enemy anymore. It was her sanctuary. Instead of huddling under the meager overhang of the barracks roof, waiting for pity or the eventual turning of a key, Maya turned her back on the source of her humiliation. Her mind, now shockingly clear, scanned the landscape. To the east, the academy was a collection of dark, sleeping buildings. But to the west, beyond the perimeter fence and across a treacherous, muddy valley, lay the ridge. It was known as the Reaper's Teeth, a jagged spine of rock and dense forest that was strictly off limits to cadets. It was the private training ground of the elite Navy SEALs, who used Blackwood as a forward operating base for their specialized training cycles. A flash of lightning split the sky, and for a brief, brilliant second, the ridge was illuminated. Sisautim, tiny, dark figures moving with impossible speed and purpose through the deluge, their headlamps cutting swaths through the darkness. They were training in the same storm that had been used as a tool to torment her, but they weren't enduring it. They were commanding it. They were running towards the chaos. A wild, desperate idea took root in her soul. It was insane. It was against every rule in the book. If she was caught, her career at Blackwood would be over before it had truly begun. But the alternative to stand shivering outside a locked door, a victim of petty cruelty, was unthinkable. Her decision was made in a heartbeat. Dressed only in her thin towel, she ran back to the now empty obstacle course. Her uniform lay in a muddy heap where she'd left it. She pulled on the cold, soaked fatigues, the wet fabric clinging to her skin like a second, icy skin. She didn't bother with boots, just shoved her bare feet into her mud-caked running shoes. Then she started to run. The journey to the ridge was a brutal pilgrimage. Mud sucked at her feet, trying to pull her down into the earth. The wind howled in her ears, a physical force that pushed her back. Thorny branches clawed at her face and arms, leaving angry red welts. But with every step, the fire inside her grew hotter, burning away the last vestiges of fear and doubt. This was no longer about Vance or the barracks. This was about her. She finally reached the base of the ridge, her lungs heaving, her body a symphony of pain. She began to climb, using her hands to pull herself up the slick, rocky incline. Just as she cleared the first crest, a figure materialized from the darkness, as if born from the storm itself. He was huge, a mountain of a man clad in black tactical gear, his face obscured by shadow. The barrel of a rifle was pointed directly at her chest. "You've got 3 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't put you in the ground." The man's voice was a low growl, like stones grinding together. It was a voice that held no room for negotiation. Maya didn't flinch. Her own voice, when it came, was raw and breathless, but it cut through the wind with a desperate intensity. She didn't make excuses. She didn't beg. She issued a challenge. "Train me," she gasped, meeting the unseen eyes of the shadow before her. "Break. Make me one of you." The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. The man, a Master Chief Petty Officer whose very presence radiated lethal competence, studied the bedraggled, half-drowned cadet in front of him. He saw the scratches, the bare ankles, the wild look in her eyes, a look that wasn't fear, but a terrifying, unadulterated resolve. He saw someone who had run through hell and had come out the other side asking for more. He slowly, deliberately, lowered his rifle. With a slight nod of his head, he gestured for her to follow him deeper into the night. "Keep up," he grunted. And with that, Maya Castillo stepped out of the world she knew and into the Crucible. The world of the Navy SEALs was not a world of rules and regulations. It was a world of pure, unadulterated consequence. There were no demerits here, no reports to be filed. The only currency was performance, and the only punishment was failure. The Master Chief, whose name she later learned was Elias Thorne, didn't introduce her or explain her presence to the other 7 men in his fire team. He simply pointed at a weighted pack, a monstrous 70-pound beast of canvas, and Steelan said, "Put it on." The moment the weight settled on her shoulders, her knees buckled. It was more than she had ever carried, and she was already running on fumes. The drill was a nightmare of perpetual motion. They ran through the woods, the pack straps digging into her collarbones, her bare ankles screaming as rocks and roots tore at her skin. They plunged into a flooded trench, the water so cold it stole her breath and turned her muscles into leaden, unresponsive blocks. As she struggled to pull herself out, Thorne's boot was there, not to help her, but to shove her back in. "Again," he growled. Faster. Every stumble, every gasp for air, was met with a chorus of shouts. "You don't belong here, cadet. Go back to your little academy. Are you going to cry?" The taunts were relentless, designed to find a crack in her armor and shatter it. They saw a weak link, a liability. She fell during a logari exercise, the immense weight of the waterlogged timber pressing her face into the mud. For a moment, she lay there, the world spinning, every fiber of her being screaming at her to quit, to just lie still and let the darkness take her. A seal with a face like a hawk leaned over her, his voice dripping with scorn. "That's it, then. Done. Go home, little girl. This is where men work." Something snapped inside Maya. It wasn't despair, it was fury. A primal, white-hot rage that incinerated her exhaustion. With a guttural roar that seemed to come from the very center of the earth, she heaved herself up, pushing the log with a strength she didn't know she possessed. She got back in line, her eyes blazing, mud and rain dripping from her chin. "I'm not going anywhere," she roared back, the words torn from her throat. The hawk-faced seal stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. For the first time, the taunts stopped. The other men exchanged glances. It was a look she had never seen before at the academy, not pity, not contempt, but a flicker of something else. It was a grudging, nascent respect. They had tested her for a weakness, expecting tears or surrender. Instead, they had found something hard and unyielding, something that mirrored the core of their own warrior ethos. They still saw a cadet, an outsider, but now they also saw the glint of steel beneath the mud. Master Chief Thorne watched from the edge of the clearing, his expression unreadable, but he offered no order to stop. The test would continue. The hours bled into one another, a seamless nightmare of pain and exertion. Just as Maya began to believe she had reached the absolute peak of her endurance, the world exploded. A series of simulated explosions erupted around them, deafening booms that shook the very ground beneath their feet. Strobing lights flashed erratically through the trees, mimicking the disorienting chaos of muzzle flashes and incoming fire. The training exercise had just become a live-fire ambush scenario. Instinct and training took over for the SEALs. They moved with a fluid, terrifying efficiency, dropping into defensive positions and returning fire with blanks that echoed like thunder through the valley. For a moment, raw, primal panic seized Maya. This was beyond anything she had ever experienced. Her mind went blank, the noise and flashing lights overwhelming her senses. She was frozen, a statue in the heart of a hurricane. Then she saw it. The hawk-faced seal, the one who had told her to go home, let out a sharp cry and crumpled to the ground, clutching a leg where a dye pack had exploded in a splash of vibrant red, signifying a critical wound. In the drill, he was down. He was a casualty. The protocol for a cadet would be to seek cover, to protect oneself. But watching him fall, Maya's mind didn't go to the rulebook. Her instincts screamed a single, undeniable command. You don't leave your people behind. Ignoring the simulated gunfire and the shouts of the other SEALs, she scrambled through the mud to his side. "I've gotcha," she yelled over the din. He grimaced, playing his role. "Leave me. Get to cover." She ignored him. Hooking her arms under his, she began to drag him. He was a dead weight of over 200 pounds of muscle and gear, and the effort was monumental. Her legs screamed, her back felt like it was tearing in half, but she refused to let go. She dug her heels into the slick mud, pulling him inch by a painful inch toward the relative safety of a rocky out. The other SEALs provided covering fire, their initial surprise turning into focused observation. They watched the cadet, the outsider, refuse to abandon one of their own, even in a simulation. That single act shifted everything. It wasn't about her speed on the run or her strength in lifting a log. It was about her heart. In the chaos of the ambush, when her own survival should have been paramount, her first instinct was to protect a teammate of one who had ridiculed her moments before. She had demonstrated the one quality that could not be taught or drilled, an unwavering loyalty to the person on her left and right. When she finally pulled him behind the rocks, collapsing beside him, her chest heaving, the drill was called to an end. The explosions stopped. The flashing lights died. The hawk-faced SEAL looked at her, the mockery in his eyes gone, replaced by a stunned, profound understanding. In that moment of simulated chaos, Maya Castillo had stopped being a cadet playing a game. She had become a soldier. As the first, faint hint of dawn began to bleed through the bruised eastern sky, the storm finally broke. The torrential downpour softened to a steady, quiet drizzle, and a fragile light filtered through the canopy of the forest, casting the world in shades of gray and silver. The air was clean and cold, smelling of wet earth and ozone. The SEAL team stood in a silent group, their drill complete. They were exhausted, but it was the quiet, satisfied exhaustion of a job well done. Standing slightly apart from them was Maya, a lone, mud-caked figure whose fatigue was so profound it had become a kind of surreal calm. She had survived. A new figure emerged from the woods, moving with an easy authority that instantly commanded the attention of every man present. He was older, his face a roadmap of hard-won experience, and his uniform bore the rank of a commander. This was Commander Valerius, the officer in charge of the SEALs training detachment. He walked directly to Master Chief Thorne, and the two spoke in low tones, Thorne occasionally gesturing with his head toward Maya. Valerius's gaze then fell upon her, and he walked over, his boots making soft sucking sounds in the mud. He circled her slowly, his eyes missing nothing the raw, bleeding scratches on her arms. The mud matted in her hair, the exhaustion etched onto her face, but he also saw the straightness of her spine, the unwavering way she met his gaze, the utter lack of self-pity in her posture. He saw a soldier who had been through the forge and had not melted. He stopped in front of her, his expression a mask of professional neutrality. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken judgment. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The verdict. She had broken a dozen regulations. He could have her expelled before the sun was fully risen. After what felt like an eternity, Commander Valerius spoke. His voice was quiet, devoid of praise or condemnation. It was a simple statement of fact, the kind one warrior makes to another. "You've got fight, kid." That was all. 3 words. It wasn't a compliment. It was an acknowledgement. It was a recognition of the fire he saw in her eyes, the same fire that burned in every man under his command. It was the highest praise she could have possibly received, more valuable than any medal or citation, because it was real and it was earned in the crucible of pain. The night had been a test orchestrated by the petty cruelty of her peers, but it had ended with a judgment handed down by a true warrior. She hadn't just endured the storm. She had met it on its own terms and bent it to her will. She had evolved. The journey back to the academy was vastly different from her desperate flight hours before. This time, she wasn't running from something. She was walking toward it. The SEAL team moved in a loose, professional formation, and they placed her at the front, next to Master Chief Thorne. It was a subtle, unspoken history, but its meaning was as clear as the morning sky. She was no longer an outsider. She was under their protection as they emerged from the tree line onto the academy grounds. The sun finally broke through the clouds, casting long, dramatic shadows. The morning bugle was sounding, and cadets were beginning to pour out of the barracks for the morning formation. A hush fell over the assembly as they saw the approaching group. A team of battle-hardened SEALs, caked in the grime of a hard night's work, was an unusual sight. But what truly stunned them into silence was the figure walking at their head. Cadet Maya Castillo. She was a mess. Her uniform was torn and filthy, her face was scratched, and she walked with a limp, but she walked with her head held high, her gaze fixed straight ahead. She didn't look at the cadets, who stared at her with wide, disbelieving eyes. She especially didn't look at Kalen Vance, whose face had gone pale with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. He and his friends, who had been laughing from their warm, dry beds, now stood frozen, realizing that their petty act of cruelty had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. They had tried to cast her out, and she had returned with giants at her back. The Academy's senior officers, drawn by the commotion, stood watching as Commander Valerius approached them. He didn't single out Maya. He didn't mention the locked door or the unsanctioned ordeal. He spoke instead to the entire corps of cadets, his voice carrying with effortless authority across the silent grounds. He spoke about courage. He said that true courage was unfound in the parade ground or in the neat execution of drills. It wasn't inherited, and it couldn't be bought. He said it was a rare metal, forged only in the hottest fires, when comfort, privilege, and the safety of the herd are stripped away. It was found, he said, in the soul of the individual who, when faced with the storm, decides to walk into the wind. He never once looked at Maya, but every cadet, every officer, knew exactly who he was talking about. In that moment, Maya's story ceased to be a personal trial. It was no longer about a locked door or a night in the rain. Her transformation, witnessed by all, became a legend. Her resilience became the new standard, a living, breathing testament to a kind of honor that had nothing to do with a family name. In the weeks and months that followed, the story of the night of the storm spread through the barracks of Blackwood like wildfire. It became a piece of academy folklore, a cautionary tale for bullies, and a source of inspiration for every cadet who felt like an underdog. "Take I there, Stormwalker." The whispers followed her not with ridicule, but with a deep, abiding respect. The girl who was locked out in the rain and returned leading a team of Navy SEALs became a quiet symbol of what it truly meant to have grit. The incident was never officially addressed. Vance and his cronies received no formal punishment, but their public humiliation was a far more effective sentence. Their currency of influence and prestige had been devalued overnight. They were now the ones who were outsiders, marked by their own petty cruelty. Years later, the memory of that night remained the bedrock of Colonel Maya Castillo's career. She had faced real ambushes, endured hardships that made the Crucible Run feel like a day at the park, and earned medals that now hung beside the portraits in Memorial Hall, including her own. But when junior officers, wide-eyed and eager, would ask her about the defining moment of her career, she wouldn't tell them about a famous battle or a covert operation. She would look out the window, a distant look in her eyes, and she would remember the feeling of the cold rain on her skin, the sound of laughter through a locked door, and the impossible weight of a pack on her shoulders. She didn't see it as a moment of betrayal or pain. She saw it as a gift. It was the moment she learned that the storms of the world, whether they are made of rain and wind or of the cruelty and doubt of others, are not there to break you. They are there to show you what you are made of. The storm that was meant to be her undoing had, instead, become her forge. It had tempered her spirit into something unbreakable, a legacy not of a famous name, but of a will that refused to be washed away. This story, at its heart, is a powerful reminder that our greatest strengths are often forged in our deepest struggles. It teaches us that the obstacles and betrayals we face, as painful as they are, hold within them a profound opportunity for growth. Maya's story shows us that true validation doesn't come from the approval of others, but from the unwavering belief in our own resilience. When the world locks you out, you have a choice. You can bang on the door and demand to be let in, or you can turn and face the storm, seeking a more challenging path that will ultimately make you stronger than those who stayed inside. In your own life, you will face storms. People will doubt you, underestimate you, or act out of cruelty. In those moments, remember Maya. Remember that humiliation can be a powerful fuel. Disadvantage can be a source of incredible focus. The path of greatest resistance often leads to the most profound transformation. Your character is not defined by the challenges you face, but by how you choose to respond to them. I hope this story resonated with you, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had a locked door moment in your life, where an act of exclusion or betrayal forced you to find a new, unexpected path? Who are the legends you look to in your family, your career, or in history when you need to find the strength to keep going? What is the biggest storm you've walked through, and what did you discover about yourself in the heart of it? Thank you for spending this time with me. I wish you all good health, strength in your own storms, and the courage to always walk your own path. And if you enjoyed this story and our reflection, please consider subscribing to the channel for more content that explores the depths of the human spirit. Your support means the world.